We did a lot of stuff that went beyond the chapter on Monday. So you should look at the PowerPoint, which is available, to see if you have any questions over the stuff we went over Monday. Now you notice you have a term paper due, and Marissa brought up a couple of good points on that, on the term paper. So I'll just give you my general spiel, and it has to be about one culture that's not your own. And you take that culture at the beginning when they first immigrated to the United States. You should realize, like, for example, if you're using the Chinese, they first came in 1849, but they've been coming ever since. So you don't look at it as a single wave of immigration. You look at all the different waves. You look at this is all on the guidelines for term papers. You look at the push pulls, and Marissa was talking between classes. It's very important to understand that when you take it to the present, and she's doing Chinese, I mean, what the coronavirus has done to Chinese in the United States and Asians in particular. There's that horrible set of shootings that seems to be profiling of Asians last night in the Atlanta area, where at least 8 women were killed. So this stuff that we read about, the lynchings, the burnings in the 1900s, 20th century, is still going on today. So that's important. And hopefully in this class, as we get further and further, we'll understand more and more of the causes behind that, unless you accept that people are naturally evil. I believe it is created by our system, and our system thrives on it. So you have to have your introduction, which should be 2 or 3 pages, and your outline to turn in whatever date I put up there. And any questions about your term paper other than that? Make sure you pick a narrow group. If you're choosing the Irish, choose between the Protestant and Catholic Irish. Don't do Jews, do Eastern European Jews or other Jews. Somebody's drilling in my backyard, so let me put on my speaker. They found oil. Could you hear me? I think they found oil in my backyard. That's what the drilling's about. Any questions about your paper? Somebody said they might do the Welsh, which is interesting, but you got to make sure that there's enough material, because in the guidelines I talk about the sources you have to use, and you can't use like Wikipedia. I'll tell you a secret. You can look at Wikipedia first to get an outline, but it's often wrong. Okay. So we ended up with Martin Delaney the other day. And now I'm going to try to share my screen. My phone is beeping. Okay. And I'm also, again, what I'm doing, and I did with Delaney, is going far beyond the chapter. And I ended up with comparing him and his relationship, which was off and on with Frederick Douglass, similar to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And that's important because one would scare the crap out of the whites, and the other would be willing to push, but not scare them as much. But ironically, he also agreed with Thomas Jefferson and Marcus Garvey that blacks and whites could not live together, and talked about not exiling, but relocating in Africa. Now, notice I don't say going back to Africa. Why don't I say going back to Africa?
Is it because many at this point were born in the United States and they weren't
Yeah,
like originally taken from Africa at this point?
virtually none were born in Africa. That's right. That's an important point. And I think, did anybody in high school or college study about those that did go to Africa, mostly Liberia? Well, here's one of the ironies. Very few people study about it. A significant number went. What's often never mentioned is that there were people living in Liberia and they got taken over. So that's another irony. Okay, so now I want to talk about the post-Civil War period in the South. Does anybody know what that immediate period was called? The Civil War ended, the North prevailed, and 4 million blacks were freed. Why do I have that in quotes? Because the freedom was very limited. And I'm going to talk about that. But here's three things for your little memory banks. The 13th Amendment. Anybody know what that is? And look, it was January 1865. The war ended later that year. It ended slavery or involuntary servitude in the United States. 1865. When were the last slaves freed in New Jersey? Talked about that. Not till 1866. And Lincoln gets a lot of credit for his Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. Please pay attention here. This is extremely important. That freed no one. The cliche is, oh, he freed the slaves. He only freed the slaves in territory that the Union had no control over. And in the areas that the Union had control over, such as Maryland, those people were kept slaves to the end of the war. Then there's the 14th Amendment. All people born in the United States were to be citizens. That was 1868. They were still trying to, as they are today, deny blacks the right to vote because they weren't citizens. And now they said, if you're born in the United States, you are a citizen. Remember the 1792 Naturalization Act, which I will ask you on the midterm? These are called midterm hints. Naturalization Act of the 1790. Only those people born on the planet Mars could become a citizen? True or false? Come on, speak, somebody. Can you hear me? Anthony, can you hear? Okay. So who could become a citizen by 1790? Only those people, Marissa, or somebody was going to say something?
Wasn't it white men?
Okay, there's a lot of breakup, but only those people, only white people born in this country, only white people could become citizens. Now, this became broader, sort of, that anybody born, so a slave born in the United States now could become a citizen. And the third one you're going to have, by next week is the 15th Amendment, which gained the right of all citizens to vote. Now, you notice now that there are 243 bills, I think, trying to limit the rights to vote going on today, aimed at blacks. And so these are three amendments that are extremely important. These bills that are being passed today are going to be challenged under the 15th Amendment. Now, this doesn't ring a bell at all, Reconstruction. Nobody's heard of this.
I've heard of it
I've heard of
from
it.
Okay, what do we know about it?
was basically Reconstruction, trying to change the way of how Black people and the Black community were in America. So I think there was a sociologist who wrote about it. W.E.
E,
Boy,
great.
was it?
W.B. Du Bois. Now he comes later. He was not, but he did write about this period. Okay, after the Civil War, federal troops were stationed in the South in order to enforce the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and later the 15th Amendment. And the Blacks were given some rights. In fact, in this period, and notice it's a limited period, 1,500 held elected offices, including 2 to the United States Senate and 16 to the United States House of Representatives. Now, anybody that fought for the South lost their right to vote. Then came redemption. And I hate this term, but this is how it was taught to me in Missouri. This is where the federal troops left. Remember January 6th this year? What was going on in the Congress that brought people to Washington? They had to certify the election, right? And Grant ran for president. Looks like he wasn't going to win. So to get the Southern electoral votes, he said, okay, I'll pull the troops out of the South. And that effectively ended Reconstruction. Blacks would not be hired in the North because they had immigrant labor coming in. And they wouldn't actually, the Northern migrations didn't happen until 1900. And we'll talk about that in another part of the class. Votes were given back to the people who served in the Confederacy, and votes were taken away from Blacks. What's a poll tax?
Wasn't that money that you had to pay if you wanted to like vote in
If
an
you-
election?
Yeah, if you wanted to, I'm looking for my book. If you wanted to vote in an election, here it is. You had to pay a poll tax, okay? If you're Black. Literacy. They would have everybody prove they're literate, but they would give a different test to Blacks and whites. And it was almost impossible for a Black to think. Then there was intimidation. And in this period, the Ku Klux Klan was formed. And we'll talk about that later today. So they were forced into sharecropping. Does anybody know what sharecropping is? Has anybody heard the term? Anthony?
Yeah.
Let's hear what Anthony.
Oh, it was essentially people would work on plantations and they'd basically buy the stuff that they'd collect, but then they also paid for their like work. They paid for their time working there, so they really didn't make much money from doing that.
Yeah. And what happened is the Blacks had been given land, it was taken away. Basically, the old owners got control of the land. Now, the Blacks had no options. They couldn't move to the North because they wouldn't be hired. The threat of them moving to the North was always there, though. So when people went on strikes, they would be rented. So they had to work on their former plantations. They had to pay rent on the houses, rent on the clothes, rent on the food. And then at the end of the year, they had to pay back. So if you don't have your book in front of you, write down page 125, 126. And this is Polly, Do George Presley George by Polly. Again, no last name. So she owed him for 4.5 cuts of wool, 22 yards of cloth, 5 thread, the boarding of 1 child who didn't work, 10 bushels of corn and 30 bushels of corn. Total $69. Due to Polly for 3 months work by self, $12, 4 months by her son Peter, $32, 4 months by her son Burrell, $16, and 4 months by her daughter. Siller, $9, also $36. So you see how she came out owing with no profit whatsoever? And usually it went even worse, that they would end up in debt. Okay. And therefore they couldn't leave. And if they did try to leave, even if they had an option, the local sheriff, the local state militia would come and get them and bring them back. And that's how sharecropping worked. You worked for your share of land, you couldn't make money. Sadly, it still exists today. So we got that. Now, what's the Ku Klux Klan?
A white supremacist organization with a, I guess, goal to bring, I mean, I guess back then to bring back slavery or to stop Africans and Americans from advancing in society.
Yeah, intimidating them voting, intimidating them going to school. Now, I'm going to play what is a horrible, horrible movie. Is any, let's see. Let me just pull it up here to end my slideshow for a minute. I bet you've all heard of this movie. Do you see the screen or no, you don't? Has anybody heard of the film Birth of a Nation?
Yes.
Yeah.
What do we know about it?
Isn't the first movie about the Ku Klux Klan, how they rise from slavery and how they came to, make America great again and, fix it to be that pure white, civilization and stuff like that.
Yeah. It was President Woodrow Wilson's favorite movie. Okay. It's 12 hours in length, first full-length movie. What else has people heard of it?
Doesn't it also push like the lost cause narrative as well, or at least begin to push that narrative?
The Lost Cause of the South, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. They haven't lost, they're temporarily defeated. And so many of the chants that we heard on January 6th were right out of the Klan playbook. So I'm going to play you just a little bit of this movie. I want you to take notes and comment on it. Okay. Screen sharing again. Okay, let me know if you see the movie. You see it?
No.
Oh dear. Hold up. That's sad. You really don't see it? Oh, my bad. Now do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. No, no thanks. So a black man comes back and wants to marry the white woman. Remember Cassandra? I mean, remember Prospero and Miranda and Caliban? She flees. Miranda's terrified by Prospero. You can see why the movie went 12 hours. just talking. Notice that's a white man in blackface. They didn't even use black characters. Should rather die than be touched by a black man. Prospero is seeking to protect her. Black. Okay. So isn't that a theme we've been talking about all term? What did you get out of this? I want to show you one more clip in a minute. What were your reactions?
Well, how they portrayed the black actor, how back then they would draw them in these very like insulting drawings, and in that movie you can tell that they told him to like they made him look that way, like crazy eyed, wide eyed, you know.
And you're right, they made him because these were all white actors in blackface. Okay, what else did you notice from the movie?
The movie kind of showed the theme of a black man having this sexual thirst for a white woman. I kind of thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Taliban again, right? You know, and it explains the laws, it explains the terror. Anything else? It was a silent movie, but so that's where the music is put in, and they had subcaptions. She would rather die than face the consequences. Now, in this movie, and celebrated, is the birth of the Ku Klux Klan, and I want to just show you a brief clip about that. I could make you watch the whole movie. That'll take care of the rest of the term, right? So share the screen again. Share. I don't think I've ever gotten through the whole movie. Could you see it? Can you see this?
Yeah.
Let me just pause that. He's a black elected official. Remember I said they took over for a while? And this is the white man coming back from the war. one of the things we remember that we read about Delaney is thousands of blacks actually served for the North in the military and were less willing to take this shit. See? So the fear now is the Caliban uprising. Now again, Sambo image here, watch. Okay, I just want to keep going for a little bit. Okay, so that's where the Klans got the idea for the White Hoods. Wait, I just lost the next piece I wanted to show. Okay. Now, remember how the blacks took over many of the state representative houses? And this is how they were portrayed in the movie. You see the screen still? Yes? Now, all these are whites dressed up in blackface. Historical incidents under Reconstruction. Drinking. Shoes on the table. Do you see that eating fried chicken? Going to the White Fears. Reactions?
Most early films consisted of one reel,
You're done.
lasted around 15
Reactions?
I like how they put the helpless white minority.
Yeah. And that's something you hear in, again, January 6th, that the whites are losing their power. In reality, by 2150, whites will be a minority. What else did you pick up?
The stereotypes, the how the Black community were basically like wildebeest eating, shoes on table, acting reckless, I guess you could say, while being in a place of like in the court.
Mhm. Karina, why did you write disturbing? Or is it too hard? It might be too hard to talk about. The blacks were also portrayed almost like monkeys, right? The way they looked. Stereotypes of chicken. And this film goes on to show people, the Klan in their hoods, actually lynching the guy that you saw in the incident at the cliff and lynching other people. So that's why that period is called redemption. And again, the president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, who got a pretty good break in history until fairly recently, said it was his favorite movie. It was screened in the White House. And only lately have the names of Wilson begun to change. I was hot spit in my youth and got a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship at Princeton. They changed the name of the Woodrow Wilson Center recently. A bunch of us who were former fellows, among others, and we had very little to do with it, just said we want to revoke our fellowship unless you change the name. It's not just in the South that you see these things. Now, there is also a change in the South. Got to share this slide again. Share screen. Booker T. Washington, have people heard of him? Have people heard of Booker T. Washington?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you know about him?
Not really much. They didn't talk about much about him in class. They just talk about Martin Luther King or, you know, the notable ones.
Yeah. He would be the one that would get talked about versus others of that period, because you'll see in a minute. But he was the character in Invisible Man that the main character was running from. But in the 1890s, the South shifted from cotton to manufacturing. And you'll see this later on. There was 3 successive years of drought in the South, and the fields have been used for cotton for 300 years. And so there's just a collapse of the economy. So Booker T. Washington comes around and comes up with this. The Tuskegee Institute, which was one of the historically Black universities. But then he came up with a thing that became very controversial called the Atlantic Compromise. This is in your text, but it's cast your bucket down. It is from the bottom we must begin, not the top, meaning accept menial jobs. Then he said in the same speech, races should be as separate as the fingers on a hand. This differed very strongly from Douglass in the fact that Douglass felt assimilation as equals, but Delaney's separation. Racial pride, he said, should come before economic success. And then Plessy versus Ferguson was what? You got to know this one. This is not a silent movie, it's a synchronous class. What was Plessy v. Ferguson? We talked about it the first day of class.
Was it the separate and equal?
Yes, separate and equal is equal. And black was defined at that point by 1/8. And if somebody was 1/8, he could not ride in the white cars on a train. And this became known as Jim Crow legislation. Separate bathrooms, separate schools, all was made legal by the Supreme Court. Now I want to show you one more thing, then I'll let you go along your merry ways. B and Booker T. So Du Bois was very much for starting at the bottom and Dudley Randall, who was a poet. Has anybody heard of him? He was in, could you see this on the screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It seems to me, said Booker T, it shows a mighty lot of cheek to study chemistry and Greek when Mr. Charlie, that's the white man, needs a hand to hoe the cotton on his land. And when Miss Anne looks for a cook, why stick your nose inside of the book? So he's telling blacks not to get educated, but work in the fields, work as cooks. I don't agree, said W.E.B. If I should have the drive to seek knowledge of chemistry of Greek, I should do it. Charles and Miss can look another place for a hand and cook. Some rejoice in skill and ham, some in cultivating land. But there are other mothers maintain we have the right to civilize the brain. It seems to me, said Booker T, that all you folks have missed the boat. You shout about the right to vote and spend vain days and sleepless nights in an uproar over civil rights. Just keep your mouth shut, not to grouse, but look and save and buy a house. I don't agree, said W.B. For what can properly avail, dignity and justice fail. Unless you help to make the laws, they'll steal your house with trumped up claws. A rope's as tight as a fire is hot, no matter how much cash you've got. Speak soft and try your little plan, but as for me, I'll be a man. It seems to me, said Booker T. I disagree, said W.E.B. So who do we know more about? We know more about Booker T again, starting at the bottom. And he's basically saying, let's not go for equality. And he started the black colleges, and he should really be admired for that. But they were trade schools. And so that was another split of the 1800s. Okay, tomorrow I have an assignment. You have no assignment. We'll do the review for the midterm. And particularly because I forgot to tape Monday's class. If you look at the first part of this PowerPoint, if you have questions. Goodbye.